So, we are going to end off this course looking at population migrations. So, top 10 countries of birth of recent immigrants. This was taken in 2016. So, this is just looking at the percentage of where immigrants are coming from, mostly to Canada. So, oddly enough, number one is the Philippines, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, India, China, Iran, Pakistan, United States, Syria, United Kingdom, France, and South Korea. So we have quite an interesting mishmash of immigrants to Canada. So why do people move? There are two major reasons for people to move, and these are called push and pull factors. And they're pretty much exactly what they mean. So a push factor is something that would force you out of your country, that would cause people to go somewhere else. So things like low wages, food shortages, persecution, overcrowding, crime rates. I don't know why low wages on there again. War, obviously. So these are all things that would motivate you to leave your country, to push you out of your country. That's how I kind of remember, push you out of your country. Loss of agricultural land, loss of forests, no economic opportunities. The other side is the pull factor. These are things that attract you to where you want to go. So even though you're leaving your country, what country do you want to go to? So there's reasons why. High wages, maybe there's a lot of jobs in this other country, more educational opportunities, higher standards of living, lots of resources, safe places from persecution. Maybe you have family to support you, all these things. So people who move away from a country are called an emigrant. People who come to a country are called immigrants. Very similar. Emigrant and immigrant. I know it's more than 2 million people per year migrate permanently, but many more do so temporarily. A lot just move within their own country. So you can move. For example, if you live in Canada, you can move from Ontario to British Columbia or Alberta or out east, PEI, that sort of stuff. That does not count as immigration because you're still within your own country. Most migration is between adjacent countries. However, if you're going to move, a lot of people do so not just within their own country, but within two separate country. So this is what we see of net migration. So the blue means a positive, more migration to these areas. Kind of green is neutral, and then the orange is the loss. So that just means there's more people leaving than there are coming to those countries. So you can kind of see a bit of a pattern in terms of movement in and out of the countries. So when we talk about migration, there are four things we kind of think about when we're looking at this. Is the migration voluntary or involuntary? Voluntary means you're doing it because you want to. Involuntary means you're being forced to do so for whatever reason. Is it permanent? Like, are you going there forever to live? Or is it temporary? Are you going there to school? Like a lot of you probably leave your country to go to school to somewhere else. That is just temporary. Is the migration legal or illegal? You do have illegal if people are fleeing persecution or the border's closed or any number of things they may do illegally. A great example is the US-Mexican border. There's a lot of illegal migration between the two. And is it international or internal? So are you moving from, say, China to Canada, or are you just moving from Ontario to British Columbia? So there are a lot of factors in terms of migration. So voluntary migration, as I said, is when people move of their own free will. They choose to leave their home to move to another place. Between 1800 and 1914, we had 70 million Europeans move to Canada, US, Australia, Argentina, and other countries because of colonization. Obviously, these were empty areas, or empty. There was First Nations here, but these were areas that offered a new chance, new opportunity of life. Lots of population pressures in Europe were used at the time, and you could find safety in these new homes because there was no persecution in these new worlds that they were moving to. Voluntary migration within Canada. We only refer to voluntary migrants as immigrants. Now, that's kind of a broad range, but that's what we call them. We allow approximately 250,000 per year to immigrate to Canada, and there are 4 categories of immigrants when you come to Canada. There's family, so that means you have more family living in Canada and you're coming to live with them. Economic, so you're a skilled worker or a business person coming to work in Canada. Other is pretty much everything else, humanitarian or compassionate reasons. And then refugees are people who are escaping persecution, torture, or cruel and unusual punishment. And they move to Canada to escape persecution. So that's kind of the 4 categories in terms of voluntary migration within Canada. Involuntary migration, obviously, is the movement of people against their will. The most extreme example of this, of course, is slavery between the 1500s and 1810, when 10 to 15 million Africans were sold into slavery in the Americas, which is a long story in and of itself. And of course, as I said, this is the most extreme example of they were forcibly taken to become slaves in America to work, which is again a much larger story, and unfortunately it's not really the platform to talk about it right now. We will, but not right now, so keep that in the back of your mind. There are 2 types of involuntary migration. We have geopolitical, conflict, ethnic or religious reasons within your country that are forcing you out, and these people tend to be what we call refugees, because if you claim refugee status, you have to be able to prove that if you were to go to your home country, your life would be in danger. And that's what refugee status is. And then, of course, environmental is the other one. If there is a large environmental change, drought, famine, hurricane, nuclear disaster, that sort of thing, that is considered environmental, and that would force you out of where you live. The permanent versus temporary. A lot more migration these days is temporary. We want to stay displaced, but because of globalization, a lot of us end up changing and moving quite frequently, more so than we did before. Work can move us somewhere temporarily, but we may end up liking it and staying. We see a lot of this. Refugees are usually considered temporary, but increasingly they are staying more and more in their adopted countries. So that's something as well in terms of permanent and versus temporary. Legal or illegal. Countries are free to make laws about migration. So each country has its own laws. Some countries are very open. Some refuse any migration at all. So some of them do close their borders completely. Canada does allow a lot of immigrants with the intention of making them permanent residents of Canada. Germany allows very few permanent immigrants and a loss of temporary workers. So that's a big one too. Middle Eastern countries allow a lot of guest workers, but both low-level and high-level jobs. So it all depends on where you're going, and it depends on the country. The rules are different everywhere because you make your own. There's no standard set of rules. Each country makes their own rules about migration. Many people in new core countries see old core countries as places of opportunity, jobs, safety. Sometimes it's very difficult for them to get to those countries legally, so a lot of them kind of do so illegally, especially if they don't have the education or attractive qualities that countries may look for when bringing in immigration, because a lot of countries want to bring immigrants to their country that are going to contribute. And while you are a hard worker, you may perhaps on paper do not appear as attractive as someone who has that master's degree or some such. So I know it's not good, but it's the way it is. Countries that, like I said, that want immigrants only want the best. And the 2 types of immigration are people who sneak into the country. U.S.-Mexican border here. You can see the Trump still hasn't built as well. It's not there, so we have a lot of this. There are over 12 million illegal immigrants in the United States, and the vast majority are from Mexico and other Latin countries. Between 700,000 and 850,000 illegals enter the United States every year, and about 50,000 Africans enter Europe. Thousands die trying, which is terribly sad as well. Same with the U.S.-Mexican border. A lot of them die, which is unfortunate because, let's see, international or internal migration. When the Industrial Revolution started, there was a huge shift in terms of people moving from the countryside to urban centers, to city centers. So this is what we call internal migration. Old core countries, this is basically stopped. Canada split about 20% rural and 80% urban. We still have big sprawling farms and areas, but we also have giant metropolis centers like Toronto, for example. But if you drive about 4 hours outside of Toronto, you start hitting large farmland. So you do see that. But in new core, near core, and far periphery countries, they're still a little behind, so their migration is full on from the countryside into the city centers. And so you can see here if we're looking at Canada in the past 10 years, you see the interprovincial migration, so the most attractive spots for people to move to, and then not many people are moving into the Yukon, kind of neutral. A lot of people moving out of Ontario and Quebec. These are the most heavily populated provinces in in Canada. British Columbia is very popular to live, and Alberta as well. And the reason for Alberta is because of the jobs. There's a lot of high-paying jobs out in Alberta, and that's why so many people like to live in Alberta. And BC is kind of like the California of Canada, so a lot of people like BC. So what are some of the issues we have with migration? What are some of the impacts it has on the population itself? So the brain drain and the brain gain are two big ones. So when educated immigrants arrive at their destined countries, these countries benefit from them being there. The economies grow, innovation grows, government gets more funding, quality of life improves. So there is a gain. So that's a brain gain for the country it's coming to, whereas this person who has left their home country is up to it's lost. It's a brain drain. The economy suffers. There's no innovation. There's less tax for government spending as they're leaving the country. So it's kind of a catch-22. Remittance. What is a remittance? A remittance are payments that migrants send back to their family members in their home countries. So this is kind of an interesting a little bit of an economic look here. So where does the money go? So you may leave your home country, go to this other country, get a good job, but you still send money home to mom and dad to help them. And this is a huge business around the world. And you'll notice a lot of it's coming out of North America, especially the United States, and going overseas. So there's a lot of money going into these other countries where people are able to get out and then to get a better job or higher paying job, and then they send it home. So this is what remittance does, and this is a huge economy. This is a huge business. There are specifically businesses set up to help you send money home to convert and send home. So it's huge business. And what does this do to the economy there? 221 billion is sent around the world in remittances every year, which is wild. That's huge. There's a lot of benefits to migrants receiving this. They have in-demand skills. They need to buy things so the economy sells more. They pay taxes. But we do have problems. Some countries do not like immigration, and therefore immigrants are not welcomed. Usually these people are temporary and not considered permanent members. 49% of Toronto's population are immigrants, which is huge. Huge. That makes it a very diverse city. Paris has much more localized ghettos of immigrants than Toronto. Some unemployment rates and the immigration rates can be as high as 15%. Because the problem is, if you're not integrated into the country, you don't feel like you're part of that country. So you have no loyalty, no nationality, no maybe connection to that country. So it can result poorly. So Paris has some of these issues. Discrimination, of course. There's a lot of negative opinions of immigrants, so it's difficult for them to find work, and it happens everywhere. This happens everywhere, and it all kind of depends on the cultural milieu at the time. Right, if you remember during COVID, there was a lot of hate towards Asians. Didn't matter where you're from. There was a lot of hate and attack. After 9/11, there's a lot of hate and attack on Muslims. Right now, there's a lot of hate and attack on people of color. So all these things are ongoing, and discrimination is worldwide, and it's still an issue as well. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. Huge discrimination here. Immigration, there's a lot of perceived costs. A lot of people who live in the country that have a lot of immigrants think they pay more in taxes in terms to help them out, welfare and job losses. This is not true. This is just not true. There are certain things that are set up by the governments, but a lot of people fear that the immigrants coming in steal their jobs, steal their money, that sort of thing, whereas they actually stimulate the economy because they become consumers of that economy that they're in. And of course, the big fear is terrorism. Are you coming here to ruin my way of life? Which, again, not true. In some instances, it's perhaps true, but not me. America is obviously the big example for all of this. Everything kind of boils back down to America, doesn't it? There's obviously a huge amount of Americans who do not want illegal Mexicans coming into the country. They want to spend billions on border guards, and Trump literally got elected because he wanted to build a wall between them. If they're caught, they're sent back. They've literally got children in cages on the border to send them back. It's terrible. So America's a prime example of these illegal issues in terms of migration. Smuggling is a huge issue as well. Smuggling is actually something that happens near me. I live along the Brockville, along the river, and across the river is America, and you actually have cases of people smuggling Americans across in their boats to live here, which is odd but true. And then, of course, smuggling on ships is a terrible, terrible thing. A lot of people going to debt, trying to make it dirty, confined ships, not all that far removed from slavery. So we know that, replacement migration, we know populations in old core countries are getting older, and that we need working age people. So we can't do that naturally. So we need, Germany, for example, will need 24 million immigrants by 2050 if they want the same number of working age people. So if you're not having babies, you need to let immigrants in order to have the dependency load, someone to depend on. Refugees, of course, as we talked about, forced to leave their homes due to the violence and the government's controls. And we see violence as a problem. We tend to see refugee camps building, unfortunately, and that's where they end up living for so long. It's only supposed to be temporary, but they end up being there for so long. An internally displaced person are refugees who do not leave their country. So they can't afford to get out of their country, so they're just moved from one area of their country to the United. And they're not sure what to do with this. So the United Nations High Commission for Refugee actually has 3 solutions in order to deal with internally displaced persons. Voluntary repatriation just means if things get better, you get to go home. So the flood is over, you can go back, or the war hopefully ends and you can go home. And so that's part of it as well. Local integration. This is the hope that refugees are able to integrate into the first country that grants them asylum, so allows them to enter. There's work done to place these people, and then but the country that takes them has to agree to this. So you just integrate into the country. And third country resettlement. If you can't go home and the country you claimed asylum is either declines your request or can't deal with you, then hopefully another country can take you as a refugee. It's not a great plan, but it's all they really have to work with. There are people in the West who don't like accepting refugees, much like immigration, and feel that there are far too many, but most refugees are accepted by other non-core countries. The Canadian government takes a long time to process refugee applications, and it tries to make sure that they are legitimate claims, because obviously for every 10 that are legitimate, or every 9 that are legitimate, there's one that's not. So it's unfortunate, but something that does happen. Okay, so that is it. The final lecture for this unit on population migrations. Hope you learned a little something, and good luck on your test. Sorry, quiz. And we'll see everyone in the next unit. Okay, bye.